July 1947. Roswell, New Mexico. Wreckage of an unknown craft litters a field measuring almost a mile long and hundreds of yards wide. The U.S. Army sends trucks filled with soldiers to the location. Their mission, to secure and retrieve everything from the crash site. The military initially calls the craft a flying disc in a press release. The Army quickly recants the UFO story, and a press conference is scheduled in which the media is told that the wreckage is nothing more than a weather balloon. But according to many UFO researchers, at the same time that the press is distracted with supposedly fake debris, the actual Roswell wreckage and possibly other retrieved items are taken under military control. They are surreptitiously flown almost 1,500 miles away to a military base in Dayton, Ohio, named Wright Field. According to UFO legend, its precise destination is a hangar on the base, Hangar 18.
We know that stuff got shipped to Wright because of the testimony of the people who were involved in the shipments on both ends.
A declassified FBI document dated July 8, 1947, the same week as the Roswell crash, also provides ties to Wright Field.
The object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector. But that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not borne out this belief. Disc and balloon being transported to Wright Field by special plane for examination.
Soon after the Roswell debris arrives, the class of 1947 from the military's elite airman training facility, the prestigious Air War College, is flown to Wright Field to investigate. One of the officers on scene is a battle-tested hero of World War II, a fighter pilot whose reputation earns him the nickname Black Mac. But nothing would prepare Marion Magruder and his classmates for what they would witness at Wright Field. It would change their lives forever.
He saw metal that was very pliable, that you could wrinkle up in your hands, and then it would go right back into shape, and it was very light, and yet you couldn't tear it apart. He saw parts of wreckage of what were extraterrestrial craft. He saw bodies, and he also saw a living being. He said that it was childlike, very thin with an oversized head and long arms with 4 digits. My father referred to the fact that we killed it. I'm sure we did not do it on purpose, but they were experimenting, and obviously we did not know how to make this entity live. But this being did die, and the way he referred to it is, we killed him.
According to his son Mark, Lieutenant Colonel Magruder and his classmates are sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial. Because of this, he keeps his secret for 50 years, even from his family. But in 1997, his health fading, Black Mac begins to open up to those closest to him.
I said, Dad, are you finally going to tell us what you know so that we will know? And at the time, he said it was an awesome secret to carry all of his life, to know that there were more than us on this earth, and to not be able to tell anybody. I've never told this story on TV before, and it's difficult to do it now because I want my father's legacy to be as honorable as his life was, and it's very important to me that you know that I'm telling you the truth as he absolutely knew it to be. He just needed to let us know, his children know, that we weren't alone.
Black Mac Magruder's story is not an isolated tale. In fact, for more than half a century, similar stories have surfaced about UFO wreckage, alien bodies, secret underground cryogenic chambers, and a mysterious hangar at the base. Wright Field would grow and be renamed Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but questions about the base and its legendary Hangar 18 would remain.
Hangar 18 has always been a mystery at Patterson Air Force Base. If you want to know the truth about UFOs, about the craft, the debris, probably the records, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, in my estimation, would be the place to go.
If these claims are true, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, one of the largest and most important in America's military, could be ground zero for recovered UFO material.
All the information I have from all my sources says it was shipped here, and the people who actually worked at Wright-Patterson, who actually wore a uniform here, said it was here. Wreckage, entire pieces of the craft and whole sections of the craft, bodies were brought in. In fact, bodies were brought in on a regular basis from a number of different crashes from Roswell on.
Not only was debris from many UFO crashes allegedly shipped to the base, but from the late 1940s until the end of the 1960s, all reports regarding UFOs were conducted at Wright-Patterson for the military's official UFO investigation, Project Blue Book. Wright-Patterson evolved into one of the most talked about bases in UFO lore. However, the Air Force's description of the base is much different.
Really what makes Wright-Patterson unique is we are by and large focused on tomorrow. What is tomorrow's Air Force going to look like? What kind of airplanes will we fly? What kind of weapons will be on those aircraft? What kind of technology will be in the cockpit? We have the Air Force Research Laboratory here. We buy all of the aircraft in the United States Air Force through the offices that are here. We are responsible for all of the flight tests, all of the science and technology. We're also responsible for all of the major intelligence that's done for air and space. Some of the research that goes on in technology may be classified because we're trying to protect the technology that we develop to make sure that we provide our soldiers and our airmen the best advantage.
Until the early 1990s, much of this scientifically advanced work was done by the Foreign Technology Division, or FTD, which many researchers believe is the key to understanding Wright-Patterson's role in UFO history.
The Foreign Technology Division was the Air Force unit that was responsible for scientific and technical intelligence as it applied to the air and space and missile capability of mainly the Soviet Union. They were there to prevent technological surprise. They were the experts in the bad guys' equipment.
Wright-Patterson has a history of duplicating Russian equipment, German equipment, and reverse engineering it. Why would they not do the same thing with extraterrestrial technology? And so there's no question in my mind that's exactly what we're doing.
Coming up, a second major UFO recovery and a second secret trip to Hangar 18.
You saw two bodies through the porthole slumped over.
March 25th, 1948, Aztec, New Mexico. What starts as a normal day for local oil workers turns into an encounter with the unknown. As they approach the western edge of the mesa, a large silver object grabs their attention.
When the oil workers got to the mesa, there was a disc approximately 100 feet in diameter.
Because the ship is found intact, it appears to be a landing as opposed to a crash.
The witnesses I talked to, both Ken Farley and Doug Nolan, young men at the time would not enter the craft. Bill Ferguson, the foreman, more senior gentleman, was yelling at the workers to get away from it.
Except for a shattered porthole, there isn't any immediate sign of damage.
Doug Nolan reported to me he saw two bodies through the porthole slumped over.
Within hours, trucks arrive, supposedly from Camp Hale, Colorado. It appears the U.S. government has another UFO incident to contend with. Having learned from their mistakes at Roswell, the Army quickly takes control of the situation.
Roswell 9 months earlier had been sort of botched by putting it on the front page of many newspapers around the country. I think the military had really fine-tuned their skills on going in and retrieving a down-flying disc or UFO. The secrecy started immediately upon the military's arrival at the crash site. They separated the locals and reminded them of their patriotic duty for the United States and swore them to secrecy.
58 years ago, you were told to shut up for national security. You did it because you respected and trusted the government.
The military wanted that craft immediately, and they would do whatever it took to get it out of there.
According to the eyewitnesses, the Army recovers between 14 and 16 badly burned alien bodies from the craft. The recovery team reportedly brings both the ship and the alien corpses to a local safe house, away from the media.
Take it to the nearest military base where you can control access to it. And then you arrange to ship it to an appropriate place, depending on what you want done. But again, Wright-Patterson would be the eventual repository.
Because of the number of alien bodies at Aztec, it is considered one of the most significant UFO retrievals to date. But UFO researchers say there are many other cases tied to Wright Field. October 1947, Paradise Valley, Arizona. May 1953, Kingman, Arizona. June 1953, Laredo, Texas. And December 5th, 1965, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, are only a few of the alleged flying saucer recoveries in the U.S. alone. No matter where a UFO lands, it seems all roads lead back to Wright-Patterson and Hangar 18.
The Wright-Pat was kind of a graveyard for some of these things, and probably put them in a holding pattern until technology got to where they could look at them better.
But despite countless books and the public interest in UFOs, there was no official confirmation about alien aircraft at Hangar 18. Eventually, attention shifted away from Wright-Patterson. Interest was revived, however, in 1978, when UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield gave a speech at the annual Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON Symposium, coincidentally held in Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson's home.
Len was doing things in this field that nobody else had done. He actually had developed a number of people that were leaking information to him. They were given testimony on things that they had seen and done. Not just one person, but a whole entourage of people that he developed a trust where people knew they could trust him and he wouldn't expose them, and they could give him the information and he could correlate it with others and determine what's real and what isn't.
Stringfield wrote several books on the subject of UFO crashes and their retrievals. Because of the secrecy involved, many of his sources didn't want their full names published for fear of losing their top-secret government jobs. Among the stories of wreckage being stored at Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson was a tale about a Navy pilot identified only as PJ, who, along with several others, accidentally entered a restricted hangar.
For a brief 30 seconds, a disc-shaped object of metallic color, 15 feet wide and 8 feet deep, was seen. I cannot confirm anything other than it was there.
According to Stringfield's research, they were confronted by the guards and quickly escorted out of the hangar.
Once outside, we had reassured each other that the good old U.S. had developed, or had all along, flying saucers in service.
As these stories started surfacing, other witnesses came forward. UFO researcher and Aberdeen, Washington police detective James Clarkson located June Crane, a former employee of Wright-Patterson from the Roswell era. She agreed to sit down with him for an audio interview in 1997, and Clarkson has consented to allow the History Channel to air this interview for the first time on television. Crane's story dates back to the early 1950s. According to the documents she supplied to Clarkson, she was a clerk typist with access to top-secret information. One afternoon, a lieutenant surprised her with a piece of unusual metal.
And he threw it on my desk, and he says, "June, you're a good wrecker. Tear that thing apart. Break that up." And I took it, and I bent it, and I twisted it, and I laid it back down, and it got right back to the same shape.
So it's fairly thick, but it doesn't weigh anything.
But it had no weight at all. It was like a feather. I said, "Well, what is it?" And he says, "Piece of a spaceship." He said, "I just came back from New Mexico, and I brought it with me."
Next, from debris to aliens, June Crane's story takes a surprising turn.
He called them little green men. Then he described them as a greenish blue. And they were 4 foot tall, and they were dead.
It is the early 1950s. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is at the center of America's high-tech war effort and the Air Force's most sophisticated technology. It is also home to the government's crash retrieval program, which these declassified documents describe as designed to capture for study non-U.S. space objects or objects of unknown origin. It was codenamed Project Moondust. Items retrieved by Moondust were then shipped to the Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson.
Project Moondust had to do really with us collecting space junk, things that would be falling out of the sky when a Soviet satellite fell, when a piece of a Soviet missile or a space launch vehicle landed in an area that we could get to. It was important to glean as much of this equipment as possible so that we could study its technical makeup, its structure, and the components and so forth. It was not uncommon for examples of foreign air, space, and missile technology to be brought back here to Wright-Patterson, even fragments of them, if that's all that could be located.
The situation is the same. Here's an unknown aerial vehicle coming down. Let's keep people away from it. Let's grab the wreckage ourselves, and let's lie about it so nobody knows what we've done. Standard practice. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about airplanes or saucers.
One Wright-Patterson employee who may have had access to information about these recoveries was clerk typist June Crane. According to Crane, her top secret clearance allowed her to witness high-level base information, including, she claims, classified files on UFO crash retrievals. In 1997, Crane told UFO researcher James Clarkson her story of downed alien aircraft. For the first time on television, the History Channel is airing that interview.
There was 3 times that I'm aware of I won't vouch for the fourth one because I wouldn't.
Are these three crashes that you heard about while you worked at Wright-Patterson?
Well, one was the Roswell, and then there was two other ones.
So as of 1952, they knew about three crashes of vehicles that were probably extraterrestrial.
Right. And then the one where they brought the two men into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and put them in the icebox. I didn't see it because nobody was allowed to see it.
Okay, when two little men...
He called them little green men. Then he described them as a greenish blue. And they were 4 foot tall, and they were dead.
And we're talking about non-humans.
The non-humans, right.
According to Clarkson, Crane had kept her silence for 45 years. At the time, she had been forced to sign a confidentiality agreement and was liable for a $10,000 fine. But by 1997, Crane changed her mind. In an email from Clarkson to UFO Files, he explains June had told him, "I'm 72 years old. What are they going to do, shoot me or put me in prison? I think I can handle either one." June passed away in 1998, but her testimony would appear to provide witness to alien bodies at Wright-Patterson. According to many in the UFO field, she is not alone.
I have talked to a number of people and interviewed a smaller number at some depth who have said that there were bodies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and bodies recovered from Roswell. And remember, Wright-Patterson did have the capability of providing low-temperature storage for biological specimens. They had an anthropoid laboratory there, apes and monkeys and stuff like that. That's a great cover for aliens as well.
Additional stories of aliens at Wright-Patterson can be found in the papers of Leonard Stringfield, the ufologist who specialized in crash retrieval. Most of Stringfield's eyewitnesses preferred to remain anonymous or simply go by their initials. One of them, an unnamed former naval intelligence officer, claims to have been present when alien bodies arrived in 1953.
I saw the bodies at Wright-Patterson. I was in the right place at the right time when the crates arrived at night by DC-7.
Stringfield also interviewed an anonymous Army officer who claimed to have witnessed another group of 4 alien bodies being brought to Wright-Patterson in 1957.
According to the general, the 4 bodies, approximately 5 feet in height, were sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he had seen them in a deep freeze morgue, kept at approximately 120 degrees below zero for preservation.
Despite Stringfield's passion for the subject, many ufologists were frustrated by his unwillingness to reveal his sources' identities for additional confirmation.
The UFO community was very interested, of course. Any hint of a crash always gets everybody's attention. But the fact that he wouldn't give his sources was really upsetting to a lot of the people because they wanted to run off and check for themselves. And rightly so, why not?
I've tried to tell people he should be given credit for speaking out, for collecting, but let's not take anything he said as gospel because we need verification and validation, and very rarely did Len have that.
But not all of the witnesses requested to remain anonymous. Respected UFO investigator Ted Phillips told Stringfield he'd been given access to several top-secret photos that showed details of some of the alien bodies supposedly stored at Wright-Patterson.
The hand had long, thin appendages, fingers, I suppose, and there was a sort of membrane between the fingers. I'd not seen anything like that before. And for some reason mentioned it to Len. He became excited because he had seen the same thing. I don't know what the origin of the photos might be, but I do trust the source.
Regardless of the various witnesses Stringfield interviewed, the descriptions of the actual aliens that were maintained in Hangar 18 were all similar.
The general testimony about bodies is quite consistent. Little guys, big heads, relatively long arms, upper arm longer than the lower arm, which is the reverse for us. 4 long, skinny fingers, would have made a good violinist, as one witness said. Slit for a mouth, no visible teeth, not really a nose, but 2 little holes. Holes for the ears, big eyes for body size. Short guys, little gray men if you want. Not green, gray. I have heard that there were live aliens kept alive for a certain period of time, maybe years after Roswell, let's say. Now, they would certainly have done all kinds of testing on them.
If you hit a body of an occupant of a crash flying disc, you would definitely autopsy it and try to figure out how its physiology was different than that of humans, how its DNA was different than that of humans. In some pretty advanced investigations, I'm sure.
Now, if this was coupled with analysis of test results from live aliens, then you'd really have a very exciting biological study project.
Is there evidence of a secret underground vault that holds these alien bodies?
The biggest kept secret was the huge cryogenics networks that were required to support and preserve these bodies.
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is a vast military complex. Officially, it employs 22,000 men and women and is the home of the 88th Air Base Wing, the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, and the Air Force Materiel Command. But since the alleged UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, there have been rumors linking the base to the storage and study of UFO crash remnants, and even alien bodies. The military says none of this is true, but those who've studied it say Wright-Patterson is large enough and secure enough to hold a multitude of secrets.
I spent 22 years in the military, about 6 years at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Author and retired Air Force Captain Robert Collins says he was a research analyst for the Foreign Technology Division, the FTD, the unit most commonly linked to UFO studies on the base. His official job was to analyze Soviet technology, but Collins has also spent years researching the link between UFOs and Wright-Patterson. In his book, Exempt from Disclosure, Collins determines the mystery of Hangar 18 may lie in a vast underground infrastructure hidden from the thousands of eyes that frequent the base.
The reason you don't want to use hangars and the reason you want to use underground vaults is because you want to keep things under cryogenic temperatures and you want to keep it cold and you want to keep it secure. Then the underground vaults would be the ideal place to keep it. Now, we do have a lot of evidence that supports the idea that these vaults were there. This underground structure was enormous, and huge, long tunnel areas that connected these vaults. There are about 4 vaults that are about 100 by 100 feet. We found out that these things exist. The question is, what was in them? I'm convinced that the stuff that was recovered from Roswell and other crashes was put in these vaults.
UFO researchers have long heard reports of such a network underneath the base. But Collins' work may provide a more specific view of those tunnels, one that helps construct a diagram of what may exist at the base. According to his research, there is a Building 18 complex instead of a Hangar 18. The structure he found that fit the description is the neighboring building, number 23. Collins claims it was previously known as Hangar 23.
Now, the way I understand it, that back in the early 50s, sometime, perhaps between 51 and 53, a craft was brought in here. The floor of the Hangar 23 was removed, and this craft was put in the basement of the hangar, and then the floor was covered over the craft. And then there was a vault area in Building 18F with a tunnel that was constructed and built over to Hangar 23.
While it is possible that Building 23 was the legendary Hangar 18, most researchers have continued to focus on the importance of the underground tunnels.
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is honeycombed with below-ground level facilities. These pits were dug in various configurations and were deep enough to where, if covered over, would have made an ideal remote examination laboratory for somebody trying to examine alien artifacts that had been recovered elsewhere.
By interviewing various Air Force personnel who were supposedly granted access to the top-secret underground vault, Collins felt he was able to confirm many of the rumors.
The biggest kept secret was the huge cryogenics networks that were required to support and preserve these bodies. And I understand it was quite extensive. There were huge cryogenic storage tubes that these so-called 3'4" or 3'6" aliens were kept in these canisters under cryogenic temperatures.
What actually lies beneath Wright-Patterson may be impossible to confirm. The Air Force Base operates under the highest security, keeping access to the base and these vaults secret from almost everyone, even their own.
Secrecy goes all the way to the top. It's a question of absolutely the highest level of classification that exists in the United States government, as far as I know.
A formerly classified memo from mid-July 1947 points to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover showing immense interest in a retrieved craft and his frustration about being kept out of the loop.
We must insist on full access to disc recovered. The Army grabbed it and would not let us have it for cursory examination.
The memo was written just days after the Roswell, New Mexico wreckage was taken to Wright Field. If J. Edgar Hoover couldn't get access to the contents of Hangar 18, how high did the secrecy go? In a 1994 interview with Larry King on TNT, Senator Barry Goldwater detailed his attempt to visit Hangar 18.
I think at Wright-Patterson, if you could get into certain places, you'd find out what the Air Force and the government does know about UFOs. Reportedly, a spaceship landed. It was all hushed up. I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all the secret stuff. Could I go in there? Well, I've never heard General LeMay get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out and said, don't ever ask me that question again.
How much was there, we don't know. Whether it was just documents or specimens or pieces, nobody knows. But the story dates back to Goldwater, and I think there's almost no question that it's a very true story.
Next, unexplained lights over Wright-Patterson have Dayton on alert. Are they proof that there are UFOs on the base?
Two policemen chased it. They felt it was heading for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
They are schematics, once classified as secret, designs of a craft that appears to be a flying saucer. Various unconfirmed stories have emerged of disc-shaped vehicles being developed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But these declassified government documents from 1955 reveal that the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson had in fact begun work on a disc-shaped craft named Project Silverbug.
It was a circular aircraft about 35 feet in diameter, had a crew of 1 pilot, and was capable of a vertical takeoff at about 2,000 miles an hour.
There are witnesses who swear it eventually flew, but most accounts state that Silverbug probably remained on the drawing board. But Project Silverbug wasn't the only example of the military's interest in disc-shaped vehicles. 11 years later, a former pilot who was walking through the hangars at Wright-Patterson during a reunion of his squadron, the Flying Tigers, says he accidentally saw a similarly designed aircraft.
Mr. Warren Botts, who had an inquisitive mind at the time, was going through these different hangar bays. When he got to hangar number 4, Bay E, he went through the doorway there. There was an armed guard at the facility who did not see him in the beginning. He started approaching the port main landing gear to investigate it, and that's where the guard stopped him, questioned his authority, and told him he was not supposed to be in there. But he did see a very large monster, his words, of an aircraft that was 116 feet in diameter, at least 12 feet off the hangar floor.
Although the name of that specific project has never been disclosed, the U.S. military was apparently interested in a craft that could have looked like this. With Wright-Patterson's history of reverse engineering foreign technology, is it possible that some of the military's advances were gained from retrieved UFOs?
I think we've made a great deal of effort to learn bits and pieces based on both the recovered wreckage and the instrument data from tracking UFOs. I don't think we've yet learned how to duplicate that technology overall, that is to build something that could fly the way saucers or motherships do. If you're giving Christopher Columbus an unlimited budget in 1493 and a nuclear submarine and say, Chris is your reward, here's this great nuclear submarine and an unlimited budget, I need 2 more of these. Could he have built one? Not a chance.
Summer 1980. Mysterious lights fill the night skies above Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Newspapers and countless eyewitnesses report the aircraft was unlike anything they'd ever seen.
The main reports we saw was the object was moving up and down, was brightly lit, it hovered for long periods of time, and some people said it seemed to disappear over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But the biggest thing that gave us what we felt was the conclusive evidence that was something from Wright Field was when the 2 Middletown policemen chased it. They chased it for a long ways towards Dayton, Ohio, and then lost it in an area where they felt was heading for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Wilhelm, a retired Army Master Sergeant and UFO investigator, suspected the military may have been secretly testing the newly developed Harrier jet on the base. The British-designed craft combines the vertical abilities of a helicopter and the forward thrust of a conventional jet. After releasing his findings to the media, Wilhelm was quickly contacted by the military.
I got a phone call from a major from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he asked me a lot of questions, and at the very end, he did say, I cannot make any comments, Mr. Wilhelm, but all I can say is you've done your homework. So a lot of things that people think they see that's strange doesn't mean that it's a craft from another world. Most of the time, it's our military developing some of our technology, which we need very badly. And it's the reason why they don't say a whole lot. And I commend them for them, and I back them up 100%.
The Harrier incident raises another possibility about activities at Wright-Patterson. Perhaps many of the legends about Hangar 18 are actually a cover-up for top-secret military programs.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the government, in association with Air Force OSI Counterintelligence Division, would really like to extend the alien myth as a cover to hide their own deep black programs. Well, it means that they want everyone to believe that what you're seeing out there is extraterrestrial, and we do not have the technology to duplicate what we're seeing in the skies.
I think to the extent that they can confuse or disinform folks about flying discs and make it look like a terrestrial innovation, the more they'll do that. It's in the government's best interest to distribute disinformation if you want to keep a secret.
The debate over Hangar 18 and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base may never be completely resolved.
I would say upward of over 80% convinced that it's true. There was wreckage there. There were bodies brought there. Research was done here up to maybe 81 or 82, and then they packed everything up and moved it because of security leaks. That's when all the little stories about green men ceased, about that time frame.
Most researchers speculate that any work being done involving UFOs at Wright-Patterson may have been relocated to another top-secret base, Area 51, the mysterious
cloud was never seen again. It was later estimated that the craft was hovering approximately 7 miles above the ground. The film was sent to the Kremlin, where it remained locked from public view for years.
They really took it seriously. I say seriously because the film was taken away. It was declared completely secret.
Outsiders have only recently seen the confiscated film. While some maintain the film is conclusive evidence of a UFO, skeptics argue the vehicle was most likely a French-made high-altitude research balloon. As secrecy enveloped all government discussions of UFO issues, an underground army of Soviet ufologists began to form in the USSR. They kept their studies concealed.
Russians who study UFOs in this period report that they had a very serious feeling of threat from the Soviet government, that they were doing something which the Soviet government disapproved of.
The leader of civilian UFO research was Felix Ziegel, the man considered the father of Soviet ufology.
Felix Ziegel was a Soviet scientist. He was a doctor of mathematics and astronomy at the Moscow Aviation Institute. He made it his job to find out why are the strange objects or in the skies of his country.
Ziegel challenged the Soviet system by conducting paranormal lectures, organizing independent UFO investigations, and urging Soviet citizens to report any and all sightings. His efforts were not without risk.
We cannot say, of course, that people would be put in jail for it, but still Ziegel suffered. He was harassed both in his place of work, at the Institute of Aviation, and he was harassed by the state government authorities.
Ziegel and his investigators spread information about UFO sightings through an underground press network. Samizdat, private publications used to disseminate information, were strictly forbidden by the Kremlin.
In his time, brochures were printed in a samizdat way. They were collections of observations and letters, typed in 5 to 10 copies. All materials were typed with the use of carbon paper.
Samizdat papers were distributed by trustworthy messengers who secretly carried the copies from one person to the next. UFO information circulated in this covert manner until 1967, when suddenly it seemed as if ufologists were given a reprieve from government censure. Today it appears this respite was a smokescreen, part of an intricate government deception. The complex ruse began in 1967 when citizens reported multiple sightings of crescent-shaped UFOs over the skies of the Ukraine and the lower Volga Valley.
It was also seen as far south as the Caucasus Mountains, where many astronomers in observatories in the Caucasus Mountains would see these objects flying horizontally from west to east, crescent-shaped, heading toward the east.
For reasons unknown at the time, the government allowed press coverage and independent study of the sightings. Felix Ziegel was granted permission to form a government-sanctioned investigative committee made up of over 200 scientific and military experts. In October 1967, they convened at the Central House of Aviation and Cosmonautics in Moscow. Their goal? Determine the cause of the mass sightings. On television and in newspapers, Siegel's committee appealed to Soviet citizens to report information on UFOs. For the first time in Soviet history, UFOs seemed to be an open topic.
It was like a breath of fresh air. Freedom of discussion about a forbidden subject was permitted to the Soviet citizens. And this was something unheard of. And alas, it did not last long.
Within a few months of Siegel's televised appeal, the steel jaws of Soviet censorship clamped down. Reporting of UFOs was once again off limits. The subject was dropped from the controlled media, and Siegel's committee was ordered to disband.
The committee was to encourage people to report. As soon as the reports began to gather, somebody in Moscow quashed the activity, canceled the committee, canceled publication of further works, and put a lid on it.
Cries of a Kremlin whitewash were immediately sounded.
Why the cover-up takes place, I don't know. Is there a cover-up? There's no question about it.
But what they were covering up is the question. UFO buffs believe they were covering up alien visitations. I think the evidence is clear they were covering up descriptions of their own secret military aircraft and missile activities and satellite activities.
Scientist and NASA consultant James Oberg came to this conclusion in 1977 after studying Soviet space vehicle launch patterns and comparing them to the dates of the 1967 sightings. He deduced that the crescent-shaped objects witnessed in the sky were not alien in nature, but could be attributed to secret tests of a new Soviet missile warhead.
People in the area saw the rockets, especially at night, saw the streamers, the contrails in the sky, even heard the rockets. They were told by the government that there was nothing there, that it was not anything ours. It became a UFO phenomena.
Later dubbed by the Pentagon as a fractional orbital bombardment system, the Soviets had good reason to keep the tests secret.
It was designed to sneak under our radar as a first strike weapon. It was one of these scary things that you only build it if you mean to make a sneak attack. It was also illegal to have such a weapon because in 1967, the U.S. and Russia and other countries signed a treaty forbidding the placing of nuclear weapons into orbit.
But why, after crushing public dissemination of UFO information for years, did the government briefly loosen its restrictions in 1967? It appears now to have been a deliberate ploy to fool its citizens and the international community about the true nature of the sightings.
The Soviet government did not want the public to understand what was going on. They didn't want the Americans to know, for example, what was going on. It was a useful camouflage. It diverted people's attention. Because it was a UFO, Western journalists would laugh rather than investigate it. The cover-up by the Soviet government is in letting people think they're flying saucers.
The strategy backfired when the extensive UFO data collected by Felix Siegel's committee was published in magazines.
The Soviet government realized what these reports really were. They're military secrets. Not described accurately, but accurately enough to be of use to the CIA if they ever caught on. The government said, "Oh my gosh," and other things in Russian, and said no more UFO reports get published in the Soviet Union.
For 10 years, public discussion of UFOs was effectively brought to a halt. But that would change in 1977 with the appearance of a strange-looking object over Soviet skies, witnessed by thousands of astonished citizens. September 20th, 1977. As dawn approached in the small Russian port city of Petrozavodsk, a spectacular aerial display lit up the skies. The incident would become one of the most studied UFO sightings in Soviet history.
The phenomenon of Petrozavodsk is one of the greatest abnormal phenomena on the territory of our country.
At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, civilians and military personnel reported seeing huge star-like apparitions shooting in the sky.
As it flew up in the sky, it appeared to come over the city and then head off toward the horizon. People who were out in the streets of the town saw this blazing jellyfish streaming tentacles down from the saucer-shaped bright core.
The impressive display lasted approximately 10 minutes. Witnesses claimed that a host of strange occurrences on the ground accompanied the sighting.
They reported all sorts of phenomena. They smelled ozone, computers were crashing, drivers lost the control of their vehicles and went into ditches.
Perhaps the phenomenon most difficult to explain was the appearance of finely glazed holes in glass windows and rocks around the city.
There is no explanation for this fact, but the connection is direct by the time parameters. There had been no holes before the event, and then they appeared.
Witnessed by thousands, the aerial display above Petrozavodsk was impossible to refute. While the sighting remained a mystery to Soviet citizens, NASA consultant James Oberg quickly discovered its origins.
Because of my connection with the space program and my knowledge of satellites and rockets, I was able to find out within a matter of hours. There was a rocket launching that morning from a secret space center north of Moscow at precisely the time people were seeing this UFO.
The jellyfish-like display was triggered by the launch of the Cosmos 955 spy satellite. As the rocket engine contrails were backlit by the rising morning sun, it produced the tentacle effect observed by witnesses.
So this what they call basically the smoking gun of Soviet ufology. They call it a Medusa or jellyfish UFO because it was streamers of light coming down from the streamers in the rocket engines of the rocket, as it turned out.
As with previous mass sightings, the government had ample reason to keep the truth hidden from Soviet citizens. The satellite was launched from a secret military space center called Plesetsk, one of several undisclosed missile bases scattered throughout the Soviet Union. Most ufologists accept the satellite launch as the cause of the aerial display. But many argue it does not fully clarify the mystery.
How shall we explain the appearance of some beams that burnt the glass? When the pieces of the glass were analyzed at the Institute of Metrology in Moscow, they concluded that these holes resulted from badly glazed window glass. That is, a purely technical defect took place.
I do not believe that the launch of a secret military satellite would explain the holes that were made in the glass. My personal opinion, no, this was not man-made technology that's responsible for such effects.
There were some reports of holes being drilled into glass window panes and in paving stones. I saw those reports. I can't explain it. And all these sorts of additional phenomena, these additional reports, are typical of what happens when people see a very sudden, shocking sight in the sky and look around them for corroborative evidence. Most of the time, it's irrelevant, independent, and sometimes even imaginary.
While the mysterious holes might never be fully explained, the Petrozavodsk incident had much deeper consequences inside the walls of the Kremlin.
The upshot of this incident was the decision of the Soviet government to create a secret program to study UFOs.
In the weeks following the Petrozavodsk sighting, the Soviet Academy of Sciences received inquiries from several European nations concerned about the nature of the event. In response, the Academy of Sciences requested permission from the Kremlin to initiate a top-secret investigation of anomalous occurrences. Although aware the majority of these events were not paranormal in nature, the scientists admitted in their request that they could not provide a scientific basis for all UFO sightings.
The Academy of Sciences can neither ignore or explain the paranormal phenomena similar to that observed in September 1977 in Petrozavodsk. The program was organized to show that we did not know the answers to these questions and would be studying it on the scientific level. That was the way the official scientific program for studying abnormal phenomena and extraterrestrial flying objects started its work in the Soviet Union.
In 1978, the investigation that later became known as Institute 22 was formally started. The study lasted 13 years and was completely concealed from public view. But why did the Soviet government spend time and money to investigate a phenomenon it already knew the origins of?
There's really no surprise that the Soviet military, even if they understood the nature of most of these reports, would still investigate them. The Soviets traditionally spied on themselves as severely as they spied on the West.
If they already knew that these are missile tests, why do they have to have a nationwide study behind the scenes? I mean, it's not like the results of the study were ever going to be published anywhere. It was a secret. So it makes no sense.
While the rationale for the beginnings of the study is still debated, there is no doubt the scope of the investigation was far-reaching. The Institute 22 inquiry was conducted jointly between the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense.
It was very useful for the Academy of Sciences to collaborate and to carry out studies together with the Ministry of Defense, because naturally it was much easier for the Ministry of Defense to get the information we had no access to.
The armed forces were ordered to study what, if any, influence possible UFOs might have on the proper functioning of technical military equipment. In addition, hundreds of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and pilots were recruited to watch for and report on UFOs. No one was told why the reports were being taken.
The Ministry of Defense has an enormous observance potential. First, military units are located all over the country. Second, unlike civil organizations, an order from the Minister of Defense is sufficient for making a potential viewer of each military man, and this was done.
Every single unit in the vast Soviet military empire had to comply with this study. That is, any UFO, any anomalous object, any ball of light, any strange thing in the sky whatsoever had to be fully investigated.
Scientists were directed to investigate the physical nature of alleged paranormal phenomena. The data collected by the military and scientists was analyzed in a lab located in a nondescript building in a suburb of Moscow.
The personnel of the laboratory were not numerous, not more than 10 people, and this number was never exceeded. But the specialists from almost all the scientific areas worked there, from a physician to specialists in radioelectronics, meteorology, and astrogeophysics. Practically all the specialists were represented there. It was done in order to study all possible aspects of UFOs.
6 years into the study, Institute 22 would be called on to scrutinize an incident of global consequence, when a suspected UFO incident placed the world on the brink of nuclear war. The early 1980s were a time of tense relations between the Soviet Union and the West. The era of détente had ended, and the Russian landscape was studded with intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Each contained nuclear weapons aimed westward. It was at one of these silos that a reported UFO incident caused a nuclear scare. Today, this ICBM silo in the Ukraine is deserted, dismantled in compliance with a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the U.S. and USSR. But at this silo in 1982, something went terribly wrong. It started at approximately 6 p.m. when soldiers and villagers in the nearby town of Bielo-Korovichi witnessed a strange object in the dusk sky. A military officer at the time described what he saw.
I was riding a motorcycle not far from here. I saw a large object in the air. It had a perfect geometric shape.
At the same moment inside the silo, an emergency warning light indicated that a nuclear missile had switched to launch mode.
The most telling testimony comes from the communications officer who said that somehow something entered the correct code.
But Moscow had not ordered a launch, nor had any personnel in the bunker touched the control panel. For 15 agonizing seconds, technicians frantically scrambled to stop the launch. Then, without explanation, the launch sequence was aborted.
They were ready for launch. The UFO, poof, goes away. Poof, the command control module goes back to normal.
Had a UFO somehow interfered with the launch controls of a nuclear missile? A team of investigators from Institute 22, the secret state-sponsored UFO research team, was immediately ordered to the missile base.
They established within a very short period, literally half a day, that a military training exercise took place at a nearby aerial ground.
Investigators learned that the sighting occurred at the same time and in the same area where the military was testing flares. Dropped out of planes, the flares provided 5 to 7 minutes of illumination. That explained the strange display in the sky. But why did the nuclear launch sequence activate?
The fact that the emergency situation coincided with the effects which took place is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but it is still a coincidence.
The ICBM control equipment was systematically taken apart and rebuilt, but no defects were found.
It's not just an electrical malfunction. Something entered the correct launch codes. That just doesn't happen every day. We hear from our government UFOs are not a matter of national security. The Russian government has been telling its people the same thing. They're trying to confuse us. This incident is clear evidence, if ever there was, that UFOs do carry national security implications.
After examining the ICBM episode, the investigative team of Institute 22 continued to scrutinize various sightings around the country. Some who reported UFOs had a much closer view than those on Earth. Cosmonauts.
The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, is quoted in the Thread 3 documents as saying, "I can tell you that UFOs are real, and if you allow me, I'll tell you a lot more." The second man in space, cosmonaut Titov, said that there were 7 UFOs dancing around his space capsule during his brief flight into space.
However, even to this day, most cosmonauts are reluctant to speak about any unusual phenomenon they witnessed in space.
There's a ridicule factor, there's a laughter curtain, there are career consequences from reporting a UFO and taking it seriously.
But in this rare interview obtained by the History Channel, 2 cosmonauts spoke of unusual objects they encountered in space.
Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke of such things.
Former Commander Vladimir Kovalyonik of the Salyut 6 space station revealed that on May 5, 1981, he observed an unrecognizable illuminated entity outside the porthole of his craft.
The object had an elliptical shape and flew with us. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. It produced a golden light, very beautiful to watch. A second explosion followed, and 2 spheres appeared. As we entered the darkness of Earth's shadow, I could no longer see them.
On a Mir mission in 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov managed to videotape an anomalous object during a routine docking procedure.
I was looking out the biggest window. It was directly in front of me. I am familiar with the construction of all spaceships, but this was different.
There is ongoing debate about sightings of unidentified objects by cosmonauts and American astronauts alike. Skeptics insist there is enough debris left in orbit to constitute a plethora of unusual sightings. As cosmonauts traveled amidst the stars, the 1990s saw major changes take place on Soviet soil. When the walls of communism crumbled, American UFO investigator George Knapp ventured to Russia, hoping to discover just what secrets the Soviets had been hiding about alien encounters. What he found was startling. Beginning in the mid-1980s, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union conducted several summits aimed at reducing both nuclear arms and tensions between the 2 superpowers. Shortly after one such meeting, President Ronald Reagan revealed he and Mikhail Gorbachev had discussed the topic of alien encounters.
I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
Reagan made 5 different public statements, including one to the United Nations, that, well, boy, wouldn't it be something if UFOs were suddenly a threat to us and we'd all get together? And so Gorbachev kind of responded, yeah, it sure would. You know, we would get together. Lo and behold, we did get together. You know, the wall came tumbling down, perestroika, glasnost.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a new era of openness in Russia. Thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, Nevada, investigative journalist George Knapp, who had studied many American UFO incidents, realized the time was perfect to explore Russian reports.
3 years ago, we have succeeded in obtaining several hundred pages of secret Russian UFO documents and photos. Other Western journalists followed. Today, it's a new ballgame. The lid has been dropped on government UFO files, although there is still plenty of information to be found.
It occurred to me, now may be the time to go ahead and try to find out what the Russians know about UFOs. It was a tumultuous, crazy time, but a wonderful time to be there as a journalist.
In 1993, Knapp traveled to Russia and was introduced to Boris Sokolov, the coordinator of Institute 22. Like many government-funded scientific projects from the era, Institute 22's funding had been cut and the project disbanded. Sokolov provided Knapp with some of the recently declassified UFO files, containing information on the cases that were more difficult to explain.
He had culled from the thousands of reports some of the most interesting ones and had kept them in these binders, and we were able to get them and bring them back.
Why would the Russian military study all of this stuff?
Colonel Sokolov said it was a very practical reason. They knew that UFOs could do things that their planes couldn't. Figured by studying it, they may be able to get an advantage over us in terms of stealth technology.
Upon returning to the United States, Knapp made some of the files public. As a result, Colonel Sokolov was ridiculed by some back in his homeland.
Officially, Russia was a democracy, but the communists still had a lot of influence. There were communist newspapers that attacked him broadly as being a sellout to Mother Russia.
But the public scorn Sokolov endured was certainly less severe than the consequences he might have been subject to in the old Soviet Union.
My friend put it this way. He said, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years ago, we'd all be shot for giving up these secrets.
But in 2000, the relaxed political climate allowed Sokolov and scientist Yuli Platov to publish a report summarizing the findings of Institute 22. Entitled The History of UFO State Research in the USSR, the report concluded that of the 3,000 UFO sightings investigated, 90 to 95% of the incidents could be attributed to man-made phenomenon, mostly missile launches and research balloons.
The remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained. He was not willing to conclude that any of these things were extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or aliens from the future or anything of that sort.
The thing is that before, the enthusiastic ufologists had affirmed in literature that all we saw was due to contacts with the extraterrestrial civilizations. No. It turned out that only a very small percentage of events remained unexplained.
But in a land that for so long concealed information and suppressed dialogue, many ufologists wondered if the report revealed the entire truth.
There is a vast treasure trove of KGB documents on this topic somewhere that no one has ever seen. And I know the KGB did release some documents in the early 90s, but it is presumed by a lot of folks that the best stuff is still hidden in a vault somewhere.
What happened to the files? Who keeps them? Until we ourselves go through the files, we cannot say whether what Mr. Platov and Mr. Sokolov say is true.
It will probably never be known exactly how many Soviet UFO files remain classified, or what they contain. Most in the scientific community doubt any smoking guns exist in the unseen files.
People in Russia still have a very powerful sense of gossip and rumors because under Soviet days, so many things were illegal to talk about, illegal to know. So they replaced the reality with a very rich mythology. UFOs became part of that mythology in Russia, and it's still a very powerful theme over there.
But many UFO enthusiasts remain suspicious. believing that the proof of alien encounters exists and is still being hidden.